You know, when we think about the 20th century, we often think about armies and tanks and famous leaders. But the real story, the one that drove all of that, was a violent, world-changing battle of ideas. We're talking about three powerful, competing visions for how humanity should live, and their clash would create the most brutal and transformative century in all of human history. So that's the big question, isn't it? How on earth did a few philosophies, a few different ways of looking at the world, lead to so much conflict, to a full century of global war? Well, that's what we're going to unpack.
All right, to get our heads around this, we need to rewind the clock to right around the year 1900. The stage was being set, and we need to meet the main players in our story. And I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about the powerful ideologies that would soon convince millions to fight and die for them.
Okay, so this table really lays out the fundamental bottom lines. First up, you've got liberalism. This is the idea of individual rights, free markets, and government by the people. Then you've got the conservatives. They looked at all this change and said, whoa, hold on. They wanted to protect the traditional order, stability, and the privileges of the old guard. And then you have the radical new kid on the block, Marxism. And it came with a totally different idea, that true equality could only happen if you had a revolution and got rid of private property altogether. And sitting right at the heart of this whole ideological fight was capitalism. I mean, this was the engine of the whole thing. To the liberals, it was progress, it was freedom. But to the Marxists, it was a system built on pure exploitation, where the wealthy owners got rich off the backs of the workers. This one economic disagreement, man, it was the fuel for so much of the fire that was about to come. So the first major explosion in this ideological pressure cooker was World War I. And let me tell you, this catastrophe, the supposed war to end all wars, it didn't solve a thing. If anything, it just threw gasoline on the fire. It shattered old empires and created this chaotic, desperate environment where even more extreme ideas could really start to grow. Just look at that number, 10 million dead. The sheer scale of the destruction was something the world had never seen. For the very first time, this was industrial warfare, and civilians were no longer safe. They were part of the battlefield. This incredible trauma just broke societies, leaving them desperate for answers and for radical new solutions. And this quote right here, it says it all. The end of the war didn't bring any real peace. For a country like Germany, the Treaty of Versailles wasn't a deal. It felt like a total humiliation. This feeling of a dictated peace, with all its blame and possible payments, created this deep, simmering resentment that was just waiting to boil over. And at the same time, the incredible strain of the war literally caused the entire Russian Empire to just collapse. And rising from those ashes was the world's first ever communist state. All of a sudden, Marxism wasn't just some idea in a book anymore. Nope. Now it was a real global power with a massive army, and it was dead set on spreading its revolution around the entire planet. So out of all this post-war chaos, the economic depressions, the political breakdown, a brand new and frankly brutal ideology stepped onto the scene: fascism. It basically grew as this violent reaction against everything, against the weaknesses it saw in liberal democracy, and against the growing threat of communism. So what exactly was fascism? Well, it basically tossed ideas like individual rights and cooperation right out the window. Instead, it was all about extreme, aggressive nationalism, glorifying the military and giving absolute power to a single dictator. Its promise was simple: we'll make our nation strong and proud again, and we'll do it with force. And what's absolutely chilling is just how fast this all went down. In Germany, Hitler and the Nazi Party were masters at exploiting the country's economic pain and its sense of humiliation. They actually used the rules of democracy to get into power, and then, in less than 2 years, they completely dismantled that very same democracy to create a totalitarian state. And of course, we all know where this led. Straight into World War II, the horrifying, bloody climax of this whole ideological war. It created this bizarre alliance, right? You had the liberal democracies like the US and Britain fighting alongside the communist Soviet Union,
all against the fascist powers. It was a global conflict that would only end with the absolute total military destruction of fascism.
But here's the thing. Defeating their common enemy didn't bring world peace, not even close. Instead, when the dust from World War II settled, a new reality was staring everyone in the face. There were now only two major powers left standing. Two superpowers. And they had completely opposite ideas about how the world should work. The stage was set for a brand new conflict.
And here are our two final contestants in the ideological ring. In one corner, you've got the United States, representing liberal capitalism, with the goal of containing communism wherever it popped up. And in the other corner, the Soviet Union, the champion of Marxism-Leninism, committed to helping that revolution spread worldwide. Their core goals were in direct opposition. There was no middle ground. And nobody captured this new reality better than Winston Churchill with this one powerful phrase, an iron curtain. It was the perfect image. The world was now split in two, divided into hostile camps by a barrier that was political, military, and ideological. The Cold War was on. Now, while the two superpowers never fought each other directly, this conflict was unbelievably dangerous. This ideological fight was waged all over the planet, in hot proxy wars in places like Korea and Vietnam, and in terrifyingly tense standoffs like the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the entire world to the absolute brink of nuclear war. So after decades of this tension, this two-sided world came to a really sudden and dramatic end. It left one ideology as the clear winner, but it also raised a whole bunch of new questions about what was coming next. I mean, the fall of the Berlin Wall in '89, what an incredible moment. And then, just a couple of years later, the Soviet Union itself just collapsed. And just like that, the great ideological war of the 20th century was over. It seemed that in this long, brutal fight, Marxism-Leninism had lost, and liberal democracy had won. But the story is never quite that simple, is it? For a lot of countries, especially in the so-called Third World, the end of the Cold War didn't automatically mean freedom and prosperity. A really powerful critique called dependency theory pointed out that, hey, the global system is still kind of rigged. The old patterns of exploitation from colonial days just continued, keeping poorer nations dependent on the richer ones. The big questions were far from settled. And that leaves us right here, today, with one last massive question. The big state-on-state battles between liberalism, communism, and fascism, those seem to be over. So as we try to figure out our own century, what are the new ideas, or maybe just the new versions of the old ones, that are fighting it out right now to shape our world?